The single dad applied as a janitor. Then the billionaire CEO whispered, "Bring him to me." Why would a billionaire CEO personally ask for a single dad who had applied as a janitor? And what could make her whisper those 4 words? Bring him to me? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We're truly glad to have you here for another story about dignity, second chances, and the quiet moments that can change everything. If stories like this speak to your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for watching, supporting, and continuing this journey with us. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what would you think if a billionaire CEO suddenly asked to meet a janitor applicant personally? Now, settle in, stay with us, and let our story begin. You're telling me this man isn't qualified to clean floors? Richard Hale's voice carried across the polished lobby of Whitmore Dynamics, sharp enough to turn a few heads, but Ethan Cole didn't flinch. He sat beneath the cold white glow of the ceiling lights with a worn folder resting across his knees, his dark blue jacket faded at the cuffs, and his work shoes carrying the marks of too many long years. Around him, applicants shifted in expensive chairs, checking phones, adjusting ties, pretending not to listen. Ethan simply lowered his eyes to the small lunchbox beside him. Tucked inside was a folded note from his 9-year-old daughter, Sophie, written before school in purple marker. "Good luck, Dad. You always fix things." He had read it twice already that morning. He didn't need to read it again. He just needed to remember why he was there. 47 floors above him, sunlight poured through the glass walls of an executive conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. Claire Whitmore sat at the head of a table surrounded by people whose watches cost more than most families earned in a year. At 36, Claire had built Whitmore Dynamics into one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America, and she had learned something success rarely taught gently. Everyone wanted something. Money, access, approval, a seat closer to power. "Next item," a board member said. Claire reached for her coffee as her executive assistant, Natalie Brooks, placed a staffing report beside her. "Facilities is still short," Natalie said quietly. "They're interviewing downstairs today." Claire barely nodded. Janitorial hiring was not normally something that reached her desk. It shouldn't have mattered. Then her eyes moved across the page. She stopped. The room continued around her. Numbers, forecasts, voices, the soft hum of climate control. But Claire heard none of it. Her fingers tightened slightly around the paper. Ethan Cole, janitorial applicant. She read the name again. Once, twice, then a third time. "Claire," someone asked. She didn't answer. Downstairs, Richard pushed Ethan's application across the desk. No recent corporate experience. No degree listed. Several years that aren't explained. Ethan looked at him calmly. "That's correct. And you're applying for janitorial work?" "Yes, sir." Richard leaned back. "Why?" Ethan's answer came without embarrassment. "Because it's honest work." Richard studied him, almost disappointed that the man wouldn't beg. Ethan had learned long ago that dignity didn't require an audience. Sometimes it was simply the decision to remain steady while someone else tried to make you feel small. Upstairs, Claire rose from her chair. The conversation stopped. Natalie followed her gaze to the application. "Do you know him?" she whispered. Claire remained silent for several seconds, staring at the name as though it belonged to a chapter of her life she had never expected to see again. Then she placed the page carefully on the table. Her voice was so quiet Natalie had to lean closer. "Where is he?" "The main lobby, I think." Claire looked toward the elevator doors. "Bring him to me." Richard Hale was still looking at Ethan as if honest work were somehow an inadequate answer when the elevator doors opened behind him. Natalie Brooks stepped into the lobby, her heels clicking softly across the marble floor. She carried no folder, no tablet, only the calm authority of someone accustomed to speaking for the most powerful person in the building. "Mr. Cole," Ethan turned. "Yes, ma'am." Natalie studied him for half a second. "Ms. Whitmore would like to see you." Richard's expression changed immediately. "Claire Whitmore." Natalie gave him a measured look. "There is only one Ms. Whitmore in this building." The applicants nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Ethan rose slowly, picked up his lunchbox, and tucked his worn folder beneath one arm. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. She did not say. That answer followed him into the elevator. As the doors closed, Richard remained behind, staring at Ethan's unfinished application. Minutes earlier, Ethan had been a man he could dismiss with a glance. Now the billionaire founder of the company wanted him upstairs personally. Ethan watched the floor numbers climb. 21, 32, 41. He thought about that morning instead of the woman waiting above. Sophie had been sitting at their small kitchen table outside Chicago, eating cereal while Ethan counted the cash in his wallet. $43. Enough for groceries if he was careful. Enough for gasoline if nothing unexpected happened. Life had taught him that something unexpected usually did. Are you nervous? Sophie had asked. About what? The interview. Ethan smiled. A little. She narrowed her eyes with the seriousness only a 9-year-old could manage. You always tell me being nervous just means something matters. He had laughed softly. I should really stop teaching you things you can use against me. Before leaving, he checked that her backpack was zipped, packed her lunch, and drove her 7 miles to school in an aging Ford that made a new sound every Tuesday. At the curb, Sophie hugged him and whispered, "You are going to get it." Ethan had not promised her that. He never made promises the world could break for him. "I am going to try," he said. That was enough. Now, standing inside an elevator lined with brushed steel and quiet reflections, Ethan wondered how an ordinary job interview had carried him to the 47th floor. Natalie glanced at the lunchbox in his hand. "You can leave that at my desk." Ethan shook his head gently. "I would rather keep it, if that is all right." She smiled. "Of course." The elevator chimed. The doors opened onto a world of glass, pale wood, muted voices, and a skyline stretching toward Lake Michigan. Ethan stepped out without awe and without envy. Wealth had never impressed him as much as character. Natalie led him past assistants and executives who looked up from glowing screens. At the end of the corridor stood 2 tall doors. She opened one. Claire Whitmore was waiting beside the windows, the application resting on her desk. She did not offer a rehearsed executive smile. She simply looked at Ethan carefully, almost searching his face for something time had hidden. "Mr. Cole," she said. Ethan nodded. "Ms. Whitmore." Claire touched the application with 2 fingers. "I have one question before we discuss anything else." The room seemed to grow quieter. "Why did you apply to clean this building?" Ethan glanced briefly at Sophie's lunchbox, then met her eyes. "Because my daughter needs a father who comes home." Claire did not answer immediately. Beyond the glass, Chicago moved beneath a pale morning sky, traffic threading between buildings 47 floors below. Inside her office, the only sound was the faint whisper of climate control. Ethan stood with Sophie's lunchbox in one hand, calm enough to make Claire more curious, not less. "You had other options," she said. "Maybe. But you chose janitorial work." "I chose work with predictable hours." Claire studied him. "For your daughter?" Ethan nodded. "Sophie is 9. She has already lost one parent. I am not interested in making her lose another one to a job." The words were quiet. There was no bitterness in them, no invitation for sympathy, just a boundary drawn with dignity. Claire lowered her eyes to the application. Several years of Ethan's employment history were nearly blank. She wanted to ask about them, but something stopped her. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. Natalie will take you back downstairs." Ethan looked mildly surprised. "That is it. For now." He nodded once. "Thank you for your time." 10 minutes later, Ethan was back in the lobby, waiting while Richard disappeared into a facilities office. The building had grown busier. Shoes clicked over marble. Phones rang behind. The reception desk. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from a kiosk near the elevators. Then a paper cup slipped from a young employee's hand. Coffee splashed across the floor. "Great," the man muttered, looking at his watch. He stepped around the spill and hurried away. Ethan looked toward the janitorial station. An older custodian was struggling to maneuver a supply cart through a crowded corridor. Ethan set down his lunchbox, found paper towels at the coffee counter, and cleaned the spill before someone could slip. No announcement, no audience, no reward. A few minutes later, a delivery driver approached security holding 2 boxes and speaking hesitant English. The guard repeated the same instruction louder, frustration rising in his voice. Ethan stepped closer. "He is looking for receiving," Ethan said gently. He turned to the driver and gave simple directions, pointing toward the service corridor. The man's shoulders relaxed. "Thank you. You are welcome." Ethan returned to his chair. Then he noticed something else. A service door near the elevators closed, clicked, and drifted open again by half an inch. Ethan watched an employee swipe a badge and walk away without noticing. He did not touch the door. Instead, he approached the security desk. "Sir, I think that latch is failing." The guard frowned. "Which one?" Ethan pointed. "Service corridor. It is not seating completely." Security checked it. Ethan was right. 47 floors above, Claire stood before a wall monitor displaying lobby security feeds. Natalie entered quietly. Facilities wants to know whether they should continue his interview. Claire watched Ethan return to his chair and open the lunchbox Sophie had packed. Did he know we were watching? No. Claire saw him unfold a small purple note, smile for barely a second, then carefully return it to the box. "Good," she whispered. Natalie waited. Claire's eyes remained on the screen. "Continue the interview." Because he noticed the security door? Claire shook her head. No. Because he helped the driver? No. Natalie looked puzzled. Claire finally turned away from the monitor. Because nobody important was watching, and he did it. "Anyway, Mr. Cole, there is one thing I still do not understand." Claire's voice stopped Ethan just as Natalie reached for the office door. Ethan turned back. Claire had moved away from the windows, but the distance in her expression remained. "Have we met before?" she asked. Ethan searched her face carefully. "No, ma'am." "You are certain?" "I think I would remember meeting the owner of the building where I was applying to clean floors." Natalie almost smiled. Claire did not. She walked to her desk and rested one hand beside Ethan's application. "Your name feels familiar." Ethan gave a small shrug. "Cole is not exactly rare. Ethan Cole is more specific." For the first time, something guarded passed through his eyes, but it vanished quickly. "I have never met you, Ms. Whitmore." Claire believed that he believed it. Somehow, that made the question larger. She looked at Natalie. "Have human resources finished the process?" Ethan blinked. "Does that mean I am still being considered?" Claire met his eyes. "It means you are hired, assuming the standard background check clears." Ethan was silent, not stunned by wealth, not overwhelmed by proximity to power, simply quiet, as though he needed a moment to let one ordinary piece of good news become real. "Thank you," he finally said. "You have not seen the pay rate yet. I saw it downstairs. And it pays the electric bill." Claire tilted her head. "That is your standard?" Ethan picked up Sophie's lunchbox. "Right now, my standard is honest work, health insurance, and being outside my daughter's school by 3:30. There was something almost unsettling about a man who knew exactly what enough looked like. Claire had spent years in rooms where people with millions wanted millions more. Ethan was standing in one of the most expensive offices in Chicago asking for nothing beyond what he had already applied to earn. By the following Monday, he wore a gray Whitmore Dynamics Facilities uniform with Ethan stitched above the pocket. At 6:30 in the morning, he pushed a cleaning cart through the quiet lobby while sunrise turned the glass towers across the street gold. Richard Hale watched from near the elevators. "So the executive floor did not turn you into management?" Ethan continued wiping fingerprints from a glass railing. "Apparently not." Richard smiled thinly. "Good. Around here, everybody has a lane." Ethan looked at the clean glass. "Then I will keep mine clean." Richard walked away without answering. Days settled into rhythm. Ethan emptied bins, polished conference tables, replaced supplies, and learned which elevators complained before they stopped leveling properly. Most executives barely noticed him. Some left coffee cups inches from empty trash cans. Others continued private conversations while he worked, certain a janitor was simply part of the furniture. Ethan never corrected them. Yet on Wednesday afternoon, while cleaning outside a conference room on the 39th floor, he heard two engineers arguing over a systems diagram glowing on a wall display. The redundancy model cannot be causing it. Then explain the latency. Ethan's hand stopped on the cleaning cloth. Through the glass, his eyes moved across the diagram once, then twice. His expression changed, only for a second. Across the hallway, Claire had stepped from an elevator unnoticed. She saw him studying the display. Ethan realized she was there and immediately returned to his work. Claire approached slowly. "Something interesting?" Ethan folded the cloth with deliberate care. "Not my department." "That was not my question." Their eyes met. The hallway grew strangely still. Ethan glanced once more toward the diagram. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "Just something I have seen before." "You have seen it before?" Claire asked. Ethan kept his eyes on the glass conference room. "Something similar." "Where?" He lifted the spray bottle from his cart and wiped a faint mark from the door. "A long time ago, Claire waited, but Ethan offered nothing more. She had spent enough years negotiating with investors to recognize deliberate silence. This was different. He was not hiding information to gain leverage. He simply did not believe his past entitled him to anyone's attention. "You know," Claire said, "most people in this building would use that moment to impress me." Ethan folded the cloth and placed it back on the cart. "I am not most people in this building." "I noticed." The elevator chimed behind her. Ethan gave a respectful nod and continued down the corridor. Claire watched him go. By the end of his second week, Ethan had become almost invisible, exactly as Richard Hale expected. He arrived before sunrise, worked without complaint, ate lunch alone near the loading dock, and left early enough to pick Sophie up from school. Yet invisibility had an unusual advantage. People spoke freely around a man they had decided did not matter. On Tuesday, Ethan cleaned a conference room while two senior managers complained about delays in Whitmore's new infrastructure platform. On Wednesday, he emptied trash near an engineering station while three developers argued over recurring synchronization errors. On Thursday, he passed a wall display showing performance numbers that had fallen for the fourth day in a row. He never interrupted. He never stared for long. But he listened. Richard noticed something else. "Cole." Ethan stopped his cart near the executive elevators. "Yes, sir." Richard pointed toward a paper coffee cup sitting on the marble floor beside a planter. "You missed something." Ethan looked at the cup, then at Richard. Richard had been holding that same cup less than a minute earlier. Several employees nearby understood exactly what had happened. No one spoke. Ethan bent down, picked it up, and dropped it into the trash bag. "Anything else?" Richard seemed disappointed. "That is all. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Hale." Ethan pushed the cart away. No anger. No humiliation performed for an audience. Just quiet dignity. From the mezzanine above, Claire had seen everything. Later that afternoon, she found Ethan replacing supplies in an empty meeting room. "Why did you let him do that?" she asked. Ethan knew immediately what she meant. "Do what?" "You know what." Ethan closed the cabinet. The cup needed to be picked up. "That is not an answer." He looked at her calmly. "Not every insult deserves a response." Claire crossed her arms. "And when does silence become permission?" Ethan considered that. "When someone else gets hurt by it." The answer stayed. With her. That evening, after most employees had gone home, Ethan finished the 39th floor. Through the glass wall of the engineering room, a systems diagram still glowed on an abandoned display. He stopped. The building hummed around him. Ventilation whispered overhead. Somewhere far below, a floor machine rumbled through the lobby. Ethan stepped closer to the glass. His eyes traced the architecture from one node to another, following a pattern he had not seen in years. Then he noticed a notation in the lower corner. His face went still. He reached into his pocket and touched Sophie's folded purple note, as if reminding himself which life he had chosen. "No," he whispered. "It cannot be." Behind him, a voice answered from the darkened corridor. "What cannot be, Mr. Cole?" Claire was standing 10 feet away. "It is nothing," Ethan said, but Claire did not move. The engineering display cast a pale blue reflection across the darkened glass between them. "You stopped breathing for a second," she said. "That usually means something." Ethan looked back at the notation in the corner. "I thought I recognized a design pattern." "From where?" "Another lifetime." Claire took one step closer. "You keep saying things like that." Ethan gave a tired smile. "Maybe I have lived too many lives." His phone vibrated. "Sophie." He checked the time and immediately reached for his cart. "I have to go. My neighbor is watching my daughter, and I promised I would be home by 8. Claire could have stopped him. She did not. "Keep your promise," she said. Ethan nodded. "Always." The next morning, Whitmore Dynamics woke to trouble. At 7:15, engineers discovered irregular synchronization across the company's new infrastructure platform. By 9, performance had dropped again. By noon, 3 major clients were reporting delays. The largest contract in company history was scheduled for final review the following morning, and suddenly every polished hallway seemed to carry the same nervous electricity. Ethan heard it without asking. "Run the redundancy test again." "We already did." "Then do it again." 3 engineers hurried past his cart on the 39th floor. Ethan continued replacing trash liners. 2 hours later, he heard another exchange outside the main conference room. "The failure keeps migrating." "That makes no sense." "The numbers say it does." Ethan's hand slowed. He knew systems could lie without lying. Data showed what happened. It did not always show why. By 6 that evening, most employees who normally disappeared at 5 were still at their desks. Pizza boxes arrived. Coffee machines hissed. The executive elevators opened and closed without rest. Claire stood inside the engineering command room with Richard and 12 exhausted specialists facing a wall of monitors. Tomorrow morning, Richard said, we have people expecting proof this platform can scale nationally. Claire's voice remained controlled. Then we give them proof. We need more time. We do not have more time. Outside the glass, Ethan pushed his cart slowly down the corridor. He had volunteered to stay late because another custodian had gone home sick, and Sophie was spending the evening with her best friend's family. He heard raised voices through the door. He did not stop until a large systems map appeared on the central screen. Then his wheels became still. The architecture looked familiar. Too familiar. One engineer enlarged a cluster of nodes. There. That is where the latency begins. Ethan stared. No, he whispered. Inside, nobody heard him. The engineer continued. If we isolate that layer, we can rebuild around it. Ethan's expression tightened. Do not isolate it. This time Richard saw him through the glass. He opened the door. Cole, what are you doing? Ethan straightened. Cleaning. Then clean somewhere else. Ethan glanced past him at the display. You should not isolate that layer. Richard stared at him, almost amused. Excuse me. Ethan said nothing. You are giving engineering advice now? No, sir. Good. Richard started closing the door. Ethan looked once more at the diagram, at the repeating error, at a structure born from an idea he had buried years ago. Then Claire noticed him from across the room. She saw the recognition in his eyes. Wait, she said. Richard stopped. Claire walked toward the door. Ethan, what? Do you see? He looked at the room full of engineers, then at the mop in his hand. For 2 weeks, silence had protected the life he had chosen. Tonight, silence might cost other people theirs. He set the mop against the wall. You are fixing the wrong problem. The wrong problem? Richard repeated. Ethan stepped into the room, and every conversation stopped. 12 engineers looked from his gray facilities uniform to the mop resting outside the glass door. Richard gave a short, humorless laugh. Claire, we are hours from $1 billion review. This is not the time. I agree, Claire said. That is why we are going to listen. Ethan looked at the central display. Can you show the synchronization map from 6 hours before the first slowdown? One engineer frowned. Why? Because the failure did not start where you think it did. Richard folded his arms. And you know that from cleaning the hallway? Ethan met his eyes. No, I know it from the pattern. Claire turned toward the engineering lead. Show him. The screen changed. Ethan stepped closer. He studied the flowing lines for several seconds, then pointed to a small cluster near the edge. There. That node is healthy, the engineer said. Exactly. Ethan pointed to another. And there. Another healthy node. Then a third. Those 3 are correcting for the same timing error. Your monitoring system sees successful correction and reports normal operation. But every correction creates another delay downstream. The engineering lead stared at the screen. That would mean the redundancy layer is not failing. Ethan nodded. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Then what is failing? Richard asked. Ethan looked at him. The assumption underneath it. Silence settled for a moment. Ethan asked for a marker. One of the engineers handed him one almost reluctantly. On the whiteboard, Ethan drew 3 simple circles, connected them, then added a 4th line. Your architecture assumes every synchronization request arrives independently. But at this scale, they are beginning to arrive in repeating clusters. The system keeps correcting symptoms because nobody told it the symptoms are related. The engineering lead moved closer. If that is true, isolating the layer would make the instability worse. Ethan nodded. Much worse. Claire said only 3 words. Can we test it? The room came alive. Keyboards clicked. Numbers changed. Voices became shorter. Running simulation. Cluster behavior confirmed. Correction loop identified. Ethan stepped away from the whiteboard while the engineers worked. He did not smile. He did not claim the room. He simply waited. 3 minutes later, the lead engineer stared at his monitor. Latency is dropping. Another voice followed. Synchronization is stabilizing. Then another. We are back inside target range. Nobody celebrated. Not yet. The room had become too quiet for celebration. Richard looked at Ethan as if the uniform had suddenly become a disguise. Claire looked at the whiteboard. How did you know? Ethan capped the marker. Because I have seen the architecture before. Where? Richard demanded. Ethan hesitated. Claire noticed his hand move toward his pocket, toward the folded purple note he carried every day. A long time ago, he said. Richard shook his head. That is not good enough. You walk in here, solve something our entire engineering team missed, and expect us to believe you are just a janitor. Ethan's expression remained calm. I never asked you to believe I was just anything. The words landed softly, but no one moved. Claire walked to the whiteboard and studied the 4 lines Ethan had drawn. Something in the shape stirred an old memory. A diagram printed on cheap paper. A research document she had read years before, when Whitmore Dynamics had been little more than 2 rented rooms, 3 exhausted employees, and a company bank account moving dangerously close to zero. Her eyes slowly lifted to Ethan. Natalie, Claire said. Her voice had changed. Go to my office. Natalie looked up from the doorway. What am I looking for? Claire never took her eyes off Ethan. The locked cabinet behind my desk. Bottom drawer. There is an old research file inside. Ethan's face went still. Claire swallowed. Bring me the one with his name on it. That file should not exist anymore, Ethan said. Claire heard him clearly, though his voice barely rose above the soft hum of the monitors. Around them, the engineering team had stopped watching the recovering system. Now they were watching him. Why not? Claire asked. Ethan looked toward the whiteboard, where 4 simple lines had just helped save a project worth more money than he cared to imagine. Because I wrote it 17 years ago. Richard's arms slowly fell to his sides. You wrote what? Ethan did not answer him. Natalie returned carrying a thin blue folder, its edges softened by age. Claire took it with both hands. For a moment, she simply held it. Then she opened the cover. The first page was yellowed slightly, covered with technical notes, and a title printed in plain black type. Beneath it was the name Claire had never forgotten. Ethan Cole. She turned the folder toward him. I found this when I was 24, she said. Whitmore Dynamics was not Whitmore Dynamics then. It was 3 people working out of 2 rented rooms above a printing shop in Evanston. Ethan stared at the paper. Claire continued. We had built a prototype that worked with 100 users and collapsed with 1,000. I had almost no money left. Investors had stopped returning my calls. Then I found your research in a university archive. Ethan lowered his eyes. It was unfinished. It was brilliant. It was theoretical. It saved my company. The room went still. Claire touched one of the handwritten notes in the margin. This idea changed the way we designed our first scalable platform. I tried to find you afterward. Ethan gave a small, almost sad smile. I was not trying to be found. Claire understood that there was a story behind those words, but she did not push. Why did you leave? Ethan reached into his pocket and unfolded Sophie's purple note. The paper was worn at the creases. My wife, Emily, got sick not long after I finished that work. Suddenly, I was measuring life in doctor's appointments, school pickups, grocery lists, and whether I had remembered to make dinner. His voice remained steady. After she died, Sophie needed one parent who was present more than the world needed another engineer. No one interrupted. Even Richard looked down. Claire closed the folder carefully. So when you applied here, you knew what this company had built from your work? No. Ethan shook his head. I stopped following the industry years ago. I saw the architecture last week, but I thought I was imagining the resemblance. And you still said nothing. I came here to earn a paycheck, Ms. Whitmore, not collect a debt. Claire's expression softened. You do not understand. Ethan looked at her. Years ago, I was one failed payroll away from losing everything. Your work gave me another chance. She glanced through the glass at the city lights beyond the windows. I have kept this folder through every office move, every funding round, every year this company grew. I kept it because I wanted to remember that sometimes the person who changes your life never knows they did. Richard cleared his throat. Claire, whatever happened 17 years ago, we should discuss this privately. Ethan turned toward him. There was no triumph in his face, no satisfaction at seeing the man who had dismissed him suddenly uncomfortable. He is right, Ethan said. Richard blinked. Claire looked surprised. You agree with him? This team has work to finish. Tomorrow matters to thousands of employees. My history can wait. Claire stared at Ethan for a long moment. That was when she finally understood what the old research paper could never have taught her. His intelligence had helped build her company. His character was something greater. Claire held out the blue folder. This belongs to you. Ethan gently pushed it back toward her. Keep it. Why? He folded Sophie's note and returned it to his pocket. Because it sounds like it reminded you not to give up. Claire's eyes glistened, but her voice remained composed. It did. Ethan reached for the mop outside the door. Richard stared at him. Where are you going? Ethan looked down the corridor toward the floors still waiting to be cleaned. I still have a job to finish. You are serious? Richard asked. Ethan rested one hand on the handle of his cleaning cart. About finishing my job? Yes. Richard looked toward Claire, perhaps expecting her to stop him. She did not. There was something almost sacred in watching a man refuse to become arrogant simply because a room had finally discovered his worth. By 8 the next morning, the platform was stable. The client review went forward as scheduled, the performance numbers held, and the contract moved ahead. Yet Claire's first meeting afterward was not with investors or attorneys. It was with Ethan. He entered her office, still wearing his gray facilities uniform. Claire gestured toward the chair across from her desk. I want you to join our engineering division. Ethan sat down slowly. Doing what? Helping lead systems architecture. He almost smiled. That sounds like a job designed to keep someone here until midnight. Normally, yes. Then I cannot take it. Claire blinked. You have not heard the salary. The salary does not pick Sophie up from school. Claire leaned back. Years earlier, she might have mistaken his answer for a lack of ambition. Now she understood it as clarity. 3:30, she said. Ethan looked at her. What? You leave by 3:30. Remote work when appropriate. No meetings after 3 unless the building is actually falling apart. And even then I will try to schedule the emergency earlier. Ethan laughed for the first time around her. Claire smiled. Is that a yes? He considered the city beyond the windows, then the folded purple note in his pocket. On one condition. Name it. Ethan's expression became serious. The people downstairs matter too. Claire waited. Custodians. Drivers. Maintenance crews. Security. People walk past them every day like they are furniture. If I take this job, I want better advancement opportunities for facilities employees and a way for anyone in this company to submit ideas without a title deciding whether they deserve to be heard. Claire nodded slowly. Done. Later that afternoon, Richard found Ethan in the lobby returning his cleaning cart for the final time. For once, there was no smirk on his face. Cole. Ethan turned. Richard hesitated. I misjudged you. Yes, you did. The answer was not cruel. That made it harder to dismiss. Richard lowered his eyes. I am sorry. Ethan nodded. Then do better with the next person. At 3:25, the revolving doors opened and Sophie hurried inside with Natalie beside her. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders as she spotted Ethan. Dad. Ethan crouched and hugged her. Claire approached from the elevators, the old blue research folder tucked beneath one arm. Sophie looked at Claire, then at her father's facilities uniform. Did you get the job? Ethan glanced at Claire. Claire covered a smile. Something like that, he said. Sophie narrowed her eyes. That sounds suspicious. Ethan laughed. I will explain over pizza. Claire knelt slightly, so she could meet Sophie at eye level. Your father helped a lot of people today. Sophie shrugged with the effortless certainty of a child who had never doubted him. He does that. Claire looked up at Ethan. In those 2 words was everything the company had needed years to discover. Intelligence could build systems. Money could build towers. Power could fill rooms. But character was revealed in smaller places, when no applause was waiting and no one important seemed to be watching. Ethan took Sophie's hand and walked toward the doors. The afternoon sun spilled across the marble floor, warm and golden. Claire watched them leave, then looked down at the blue folder she had carried for 17 years. Ethan had given her a second chance without ever knowing it. Now she had finally given him one in return. And perhaps that was how grace often worked. Quietly, without keeping score, without demanding recognition. Because dignity never needed a title, and the people most worth seeing were sometimes the ones the world had trained itself to overlook.